Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be starting a short series on the G3000. Now the G3000 has had a lot of updates since I did some videos on this many moons ago, so I felt it was probably a good idea to kind of start back from the basics and sort of look at all the different controls, knobs, buttons, and things that you can use. For the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to be sticking to the TBM here. The nice thing about this airplane is it is a default aircraft in-flight sim, so it makes it relatively easy for us to choose and actually follow along with. Currently, we're sitting here at the ramp at Martha's Vineyard Airport. This is real-world weather. As you can see, I had to cancel my regular real-world flight this afternoon because it's a little grumpy outside, but that's going to allow us to play with a lot of the settings. Let's get started. So the G3000 consists of several different screens. Now, what I did do is I tracked down the manual for the G3000, and I was actually thoroughly impressed how much of the manual actually does have overlap to the real thing that you would have in the real world. Another thing that shocked me about the manual and doing the research on this was the fact that this setup is $500,000, and that's US. So if you want to think about how expensive this is, and the fact we can just sit here and play with these buttons and knobs is awesome. So the basic concept is this. We have ourselves a primary flight display. We have one for the pilot, and we have one for the co-pilot over here on the right. In the middle, this is our multi-function displays. And below those, you have the GCTs. These are going to be our control interfaces that allow us to manipulate the screens. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the G3000 is they are all touch screens. Every single one of these, basically, is something you can reach up and, I'm going to push this button. Notice nothing, because that is not a touch screen. It's one of the things that people kind of get confused. They assume, oh, I've done a G3X. It has the buttons on it. No. The only touch screens you actually have are these two that you have located down here. These are your actual control panels. And one of the things that they do a really nice job of with this one is each one of these is really designed for the respective person who's sitting on that particular side of the aircraft. So one of the things you want to keep in mind is while you're using yours, make sure you have your control panel, even though you could potentially manipulate both of them at the same time. The purpose of the primary flight display is basically going to be giving us, the pilot, the critical information that we're going to require to safely operate and navigate the plane. As it stands right now, you can see we have an altitude of 60 feet. Again, remember, this is above sea level. You'll notice there's a barometric pressure option right here, which is we can go ahead and read off directly there at the bottom. The reason, of course, that's important to us is because if we did not have that opportunity, we would want to go ahead and be able to adjust that for the appropriate field elevation and field pressure. So if I needed to adjust that, I could just come up here where it has barometric pressure, and I could go ahead and give this a quick little wiggle waggle. If you ever need to use standard barometric pressure, this button is actually a button. You just go ahead and press it, and it'll actually immediately reset it to standard. Notice, by the way, we are now indicating about 10 feet, which is not correct. Remember, the actual pressure around here today was 2.9 or 9 or 8. Again, we had a little bit of a storm today, but nothing too excessive. This indicator is also going to give you a couple different key items as well. On your left-hand side is going to be an indication of airspeed. Everything is conveniently color-coded for you. Obviously, red is going to be your stall region. Red on the other side is going to be your do not exceed region. We have an angle of attack indicator. Notice right now we're at critical angle of attack. We're not moving. For those of you who have not seen an angle of attack indicator on the side of an airplane and actually played with one, it's going to be this little metal bar that you basically grab onto, and you can kind of do one of these actions with it, and that whole bar will cause this meter to go, wah, and basically freak out. To the left here, we have a smaller display. This could be programmed to many different things. We'll get into programming the G3000 a little later on for basically setting up in a way that makes most sense for you. And of course, in the middle, we have our navigational display. We have any critical information as far as our current active bearing. And then, of course, if you look up in the upper right corner, we have our currently active communications frequency. In this case, it's definitely not the correct one, but we can fix that relatively quickly. Over here in the middle is going to be our multifunction display. This is kind of the one-stop shop for everything else on this aircraft. This is going to be our navigational display. This could give us our approach plates. This could give us everything we need as far as engine settings, engine pressures. Our flight plan can be programmed. Everything along those lines is going to be located on this display. One of the things that makes the G3000 so unique and so awesome is the fact that these are actually two independent screens that can be manipulated separately. So one of the things you're going to see me say and show, especially later on, is on the left screen, do this. On the right side of the screen, do that. It's a little interesting. There's actually a full screen mode too, depending on what you need. Also notice, by the way, we have a significant amount of weather around us right now, which does not surprise me in the slightest, knowing especially the weather that we have for today. Coming over here on the right, this is the same thing as this. The big difference here, of course, is this one's over on that side. That one's over here on that side. And I love the fact they give you the display backup button. It doesn't do anything. One of the cool things here in the real world is if this display fails, this becomes the new PFD and vice versa. It's actually really neat how that works. And of course, we have a backup one located right here with all the critical settings that we need. In the event that we lose all of our displays, we can at least safely get ourselves down to the ground. Coming down here, we have a bunch of options as far as the screens goes. The general philosophy of the G3000 is you want to select the thing you want to change. Now, the reason I say that is if you take a look right now, you're going to see a PFD, MFD, and NavCom as your option. You've also got these two little knobs and these soft keys that are located along the right side of the actual control. Now, if you're on this side, you'll notice it's actually completely identical here. The reason, like I said, that's useful is you can actually split your view here so that one side's doing one thing while the other side is doing something else. One thing to note, though, is if I go ahead and shut up the traffic map, for example, you'll notice the traffic map disappeared from both sides because of the way that they implemented this particular one. These are actually shared, which is a little different than the one in the real world. If I were to grab this, for example, and start cranking on this pressure would change, not this pressure, unless, of course, you have programmed it otherwise inside the options. So it's just kind of one of those little things that they sort of implemented. Does it make a big difference for single pilot operations? No, not in the slightest. Now, as a co-pilot in one of these, I get bored and like to play around with things, but that's just me. Coming down here, you'll notice along the right side, you've got a couple different options. One thing you're going to notice is, first of all, the selected item we're manipulating, and you're also always going to have this handy-dandy little split button. The split button is a magic tool for the purposes of recreating whatever screen that they want. Notice as soon as I press that button, my lovely little display here is now split into two separate displays. If I press the full option, it's going to automatically make this a full screen style option. The reason that's so useful to us is if we want to go ahead and display something here, and something here, we can do that very quickly. And that's one of the things that makes this such an incredibly expensive and absolutely awesome tool. One of the things, for example, if I wanted to split this, I feel like, for example, if I went over to MFD, I can actually come over here and select that pane and do something silly like this. And again, we'll get into what those panes are and how those are used in a minute. I don't want to confuse anybody too much here, but flip this back to full screen. The next thing you're going to observe is all the options linked to that particular screen are going to be located over here on the right side. Again, all the soft keys simply correspond with the button that you have located right here. The reason this is useful for us, of course, is if we wanted to click on one of these options, it's going to bring up that specific page. Now, the PFD we're a little lucky on because there's none of the funky stuff with pages. So this guy right here, you can just use it as stress. It doesn't do much. This one down here, again, it's just going to be stress. So don't worry about it too much. Notice, by the way, that this knob is also context sensitive. So for example, if I were to turn on the traffic map again, did you see how this little thing that says range appeared? Now, when I crank this, you'll notice I'm actually changing the range of my traffic map. Now, if I shut that off and I wanted to turn on a conventional map over there on that side, that would go ahead and give me, let's go put we'll do an inset map here. You'll notice now, if I crank this, that will be changing the range on that map there. So one of the things you have to remember is this is a context-sensitive knob. This is something you're going to run into. One thing that's kind of fun is you can kind of do the HSI map. Oh my God, this makes me crazy. Some people love this, but it makes me nuts. Let's go ahead and head back. Now, I'm going to get into the buttons here a little bit later on because I don't want to make things too complicated. I just wanted you to be aware of, like I said, how you kind of navigate it. So pressing the MFD button, now the important thing here is to note that our MFD is sensitive to the MFD we have selected. One of the things you're going to notice is this MFD here has got this little blue bar around it. That simply indicates this is the currently selected MFD that I'm manipulating. So if I were to take my mouse up here, it says GTC knob. If I actually wheel this, do you see how my navigational panes change? The reason that's important, you also see this little blue box up here to identify that I'm changing it. That is going to be my currently selected page. So for example, if I went to PFD, let's say I bring up, we'll split it again, and I go back to MFD, you'll notice I now have 3 panes going on. Now, if I really was a silly person, and unfortunately I don't have this option because this is not an independent page, I could actually have 4 of these going at one time just for insanity purposes. But again, like I said, that's insanity purposes, so we don't want to do anything like that. Whoa! Helps if I actually go back over here and actually program this thing to do what I want it to do. There we go. So the reason this is important is these pages can be indicated with different options. And also, if you remember, like I was saying down here, this option here is now going to give us context-sensitive items. So for example, if I were to crank this now, you'll notice it goes ahead and it allows me to zoom in and out on this selected page. Now, if I go like this, switch my pane to this one, and go ahead and manipulate it, I'm going to be changing the zoom on this selected page. It's an important concept because when you're manipulating things, a lot of people accidentally, and they'll have one selected and not the other one, and they can't quite figure out, oh my God, what have I done? Kind of one of those sort of situations. So be very, very mindful of that when you are programming these. So again, any of these options are down here. We'll go into these in much, much greater detail later on. I just wanted you to be aware. Keep in mind at any time too, if I have a particular pane selected, if I want to make it the new full screen pane, I simply select the pane, and press the full option, which will immediately make this entire screen the full size of it, which is great for us because you can see now that obviously we've got quite a bit of weather here, and we can turn that weather display on and off. Again, we'll get to that a little bit later on. The last option you're going to see in the two GCTs here is going to be the NavCom. This is your traditional navigation communication radio setup. There's actually a lot of things you can do in here, which I find really, really wild. One thing you'll notice is our two little knobs in the upper and lower part here. They now say freak push, 1, 2, hold, swap. This is very, very useful for us because if I tap this, you'll notice it switches between COM1 and COM2. If I press and hold on it, it will automatically switch these two frequencies. Obviously, I didn't have an alternate frequency here. So let's say I want to go 1216, for example. If I wanted to immediately swap this, I can go ahead and press the transfer button here, or if for some reason I'm just going to press enter for this, if I had to go ahead and press that button, I can actually hit it, and it will cause those two frequencies to switch. Otherwise, again, I can press that transfer button as needed. Now, the interesting thing is there's all these audio and radio and like kind of fun buttons and stuff in here that we can manipulate. But again, that's for another day. There's actually some really cool things you could do. You can isolate the co-pilot. You can isolate the passengers. You can turn the music on. You can turn the music up. There's a cockpit voice recorder. Like, again, there's a lot of really cool things on here. Things we don't need usually in a normal flight simulator kind of days. One thing I do want to bring up on here, though, is while you're in NavCom, going to Alt will actually allow you to go ahead and dial in any of your important frequencies and things like that. You also have the ident button should you require it. Of course, we can turn on our transponder and stuff along here. So now note, if at any point, if I wanted to switch back to my PFD controls, I can press this, and I can always use this one as my radio too. When I generally fly this aircraft in the sim, I kind of like to keep my radio panel up on one screen, and I kind of like to use my controls for everything else over here on this screen as well. So as you can see, it's a very, very sophisticated system. It's a very, 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 very powerful system, and it's very easy to use, which I think is to its point. The purpose of this video was just to give you kind of that quick little overview and understand kind of how the screens work. In our next video, we'll dig in a little bit with the PFD and kind of show you how you can manipulate it to make it work best for you. Enjoy.